Okay, so we're back talking about the OG cricket celebrity. And believe it or not, that celebrity was a Desi guy called Ranji. That guy was also a prince, later king. So I've given you all the juicy details in a video that I posted last week, which was all about his early life. How he went from being the son of a farmer to the heir to the throne of Navanagar and then back to being a nobody. I'll link the video up here. So in this video, we pick up the story from where we left off, which was that 3 kids from the Rajkumar College have now been selected to go abroad to England for further studies. And this was all in 1888. So when Ranji got to England, he stayed there for a while prepping for his exam for the Trinity College, Cambridge. During the early years of his stay, it said that Ranji was more inclined towards lawn tennis as a sport rather than cricket because he was equally gifted in that as well. But people say that once he saw the test match series that the English team would play, his perception kind of changed. His skills in cricket were basically quite raw and untutored, which a lot of experts say that this might actually have been the best because this led him to make his own unique style. In 1892, Ranji finally passed the entrance exam and got admitted into the Trinity College in Cambridge University. While at Cambridge, Ranji faced many challenges and obstacles. He had to adjust to a whole new culture, a whole new climate, a whole new type of people, and not to mention these people were obviously English and it was the colonial times. They looked down upon anybody who had skin of color. So he did have to deal with a lot of prejudice and hostility as well. But see, Ranji was Ranji. He was not deterred by these issues. He was quite determined. He basically relentlessly kept working hard on his studies and his cricketing skills. In the summer of 1892, Ranji's batting skills began to attract a lot of attention within the university. Now there is a story about Ranji playing cricket in his Cambridge days. The story says that he scored 3 centuries within the same day. And Ranji actually goes on to explain this story himself, and he says in one of his writings that on the grounds in Cambridge, multiple teams were basically playing cricket, like on different places. So first, before lunchtime, he made a century with the original team that he was actually playing with. Then he wandered over to an adjacent game where they were a man short. He scored another century. Now he returned to his own team near tea time and he found that his team is still batting. So he strolled off again. And now he found another team who were kind of like in trouble and they needed help. So he played for their side and scored another century. In turn, 3 centuries in one day. At the same time, he started scoring heavily in local club matches and displayed a unique style of playing. He used his wrists and his feet to play late and across the line, and invented new strokes, such as the leg glance and the late cut. He's also said to have a remarkable ability to judge the length and the direction of the ball, and also to adapt to different pitches and conditions, probably because he had been playing in such versatile environments like India and then England. From all the accounts and writings we find in this time, people agree that his batting was elegant and beautiful to look at. Now, despite all his talents, he was actually unable to break into the team of his own college, the Trinity College. Now, according to historians, this was because of the team's captain, Francis Stanley Jackson. Now, Francis wasn't convinced that the Indian is good enough to let him play on this team. He didn't want to give him such a coveted mark of recognition, which was the Cambridge Blue. And he did not appreciate Ranji's style of batting, and he's actually gone on record saying so. However, it's said that Jackson's views changed after he toured India with Lord Hawke's team in the winter of 1892 to 1893. He basically saw for himself the passion and the talent that Indian cricketers possessed, and he was impressed. So he decided to give Ranji a chance to play for Trinity College in the summer of 1893, and Ranji did not disappoint. He played well enough to become the first Indian to be awarded the prestigious Cambridge Blue, the highest honor for a university cricketer. Now, he only played for 1 season in this Cambridge team. Now, while he was enjoying this time of his life, his father back home, technically his father, Vibhaji, the ruler of the state of Navanagar, passes away. Back in England, propositions were made in favor of Ranji getting the throne, but the British back in India wouldn't have it. They accepted no reversal in the decision that was taken a long time ago, where Jaswantsinhji, or Jasaji, as he came to be known, became the heir apparent and Ranji was stripped of this title. Again, I have all of these interesting details in the video I mentioned at the beginning of this video. So after his time at Cambridge, Ranji basically postponed his return back to India because, first of all, he doesn't have anything to do there now. There's another king that's taken the place in Navanagar. And secondly, by this time, he was known all over England as Ranji, a cricketing sensation. Now, he had developed a really nice friendship with Charles Frey and William Murdoch, who were both amateur members of the Sussex County cricket team. They basically convinced Ranji to move, settle in Brighton, and join the team. Now, Ranji's move to Brighton and the joining of this team of Sussex marks the beginning of an extraordinary 3-year run that saw this Indian become the most famous batsman in the history of cricket. Between 1895 and 1897, he scored over 6,000 runs in first-class cricket, including 10 double centuries, 3 triple centuries. He topped the batting averages in each of these seasons and broke several records along the way. He also played 15 test matches for England, scoring over 900 runs for an average of 44.95, with 2 centuries and 6 50s. He was especially successful against Australia, which by this point had become England's arch rival, and Ranji kind of played the key role in making England win the Ashes tournament in 1896 and 1897. Ranji by this point had become a household name in Britain. How popular was he exactly? Well, the July 1896 edition of the Strand magazine said this about him. At the present time, it would be difficult to discover a more populous player throughout the length and breadth of the empire. The roar of welcome that goes up from the throats of the assembled thousands as KS steps upon the field is equal to the outburst of enthusiasm that greets the champion immortal WG. Now he's talking about WG Grace, who was also a cricketing legend in England at that time. Now, to transcend this barrier between sportsman and celebrity, it was really important that Ranji actually became a heavily favored person of the media. The press couldn't get enough interviews with the prince. Reporters were always keen on following him and finding out what he's up to. And suddenly, all the advertisers wanted him to endorse their products. It began from everything from cigarettes to cricket bats and all other goods. He was interviewed by newspapers and magazines, and there were poems about him, cartoons drawn about him. So now, historians speculate that another reason that Ranji got so famous was because of a romantic pleasure in possessing and displaying exotic artifacts that the British at that time definitely possessed. Liberal Britishers are also noted to have boasted about how their empire is so cosmopolitically generous that this Indian prince has become so famous in Britain itself. So we do get why historians would thread down this line as to a reason, a factor of the fame that Ranji achieved. But Ranji's presence in the English cricket scene also led to some contradictions and raised crucial questions about his national identity and loyalty, because he was an Indian prince who played for England and who had a complex relationship with his own people. So naturally, while so many people actually loved him, there were a lot of other people who questioned whether if he should even be allowed to play. Because we have to remember that at this time, strict color segregation was at the heart of the empire's policies. So there were growing fears which were voiced in articles and said things like this. So where will be our graces and Stoddarts if our cricket field is invaded by Indians who devote 16 hours a day to specializing with bat and ball? So there were those concerns that Indians might just take over the entire cricketing scene, because other talented Indian players would also start to emerge around this time. Now, one of the reasons why Ranji was so successful at becoming this liked and becoming such a favorite in the British realm was because he managed to play his image as an Indian prince and pretty much charmed people wherever he went. There's a famous essayist of the time called The Country Vicar, and he wrote, "He was different from the other Cambridge cricketers of my time and aroused different feelings. The others I respected and admired, but Ranji I loved." So he truly was charismatic. So one interesting thing to note is that Ranji had only met Vibhaji, the guy who was technically his father and who made him the prince, only once in his entire life, and that was while he was getting adopted at the age of 7. After that, Ranji never lived in the palace. He was never brought up like a king. He basically was pretty much brought up at the Rajkumar College. So obviously he learned from other princes and he took up this air of being a prince, and he kind of emitted that everywhere. He lived a flamboyant life in England, and he would be getting an allowance from Navanagar, but that was very limited, just enough to cover his studies and nothing more. So as I mentioned, That constant struggle of finances followed him throughout his life. He was in debt here and there multiple times. Now, also in his press interviews in Britain, he deliberately perpetrated this belief that he is the rightful heir to the throne. He was also partly correct, but it's complex, right? But he kept repeating this and reiterating this in different interviews, thus gathering the sentiment of the masses as well. And because he was doing this over and over, this kind of created so much more hype around him and also built some more pressure on himself that he now has to do something about his future because he can't always keep playing cricket. He's a prince. So remember I mentioned that Vibhaji had passed away in 1895. So now even though it was after his death that Ranji really lit up the cricket fields in England, but alongside that he was also constantly in correspondence with people back in India and the British administration in India asking for his rightful place as the heir back. He also asked for a higher allowance from the state of Navanagar, but when he realized that sitting in England and going back and forth in letters is not going to do anything, he realized that he needs to go back to India. So at the end of his first cricket tour of Australia, he came back to the subcontinent in 1898, almost 10 years after he had left for his studies in Cambridge. With his return, he had one thing in mind, and that was to take back his throne. And we'll go all into the politics and everything that went down after his return to India in the video next week.